In this video, I would like to show you a few simple steps how you could build, for example, the brakes on a bike. Here, for example, I have two different variations. For example, the frame of the fork flows actually back and then into the handle. So the top corner is actually going into the brake bar and then going back into the handlebar. And if I go into edit mode, you can actually already see how I sculpted the geometry out, and that's the same here. And for example, if I zoom in a little bit, you can see that I added 2 loop cuts, added 2 more loop cuts, added a center loop cut, and then that one I scaled down a little bit. So I can crease the surface a little bit so that, let's say if I do my digital rendering, I can select the surface and, for example, give it a silicone-like material. And then from further away, you will just see that there's some sort of a gap and a different material between the handlebar and the outside part. And for presentation rendering purpose, that's already perfectly fine. But now to build this, let me go to this screen and let me move this one up. So that's, for example, how I started for the rounded bar. So I have just my typical handlebar, and then here, as you can see, I have this loop cut added, and then this loop cut added, and then, for example, let's do this here. I move this one to there, loop cut, move this one to here, and then from the top view I can select this face and, for example, move it out a little bit. See, same structure. And then maybe move it out one more time to there. And then maybe a little bit of sculpting, moving this one to the right. Those maybe a little bit to the left. Now this is too strong, so I would like to tighten the arc. I add another loop cut, same here, loop cut, move it over. So you see, it's actually not really very difficult to sculpt it out. I really dislike brakes the way how they are because they always feel like foreign objects on the handlebar. And personally, I would rather like something that is fluid and is more out of one piece. And then here, I move those part out. So you see, this way I have the basic shape. And I said, we scale this one out and then make 2 loop cuts and a center loop cut, 2 loop cuts and a center loop cut. And then those center loop cuts I could scale along, not along the x-axis. So I press Shift X and scale it inwards, and then that scales in, as you can see. And of course, the tighter you make the spacing, the tighter, for example, or the sharper the gap will be. And you can see that the left gap, for example, is sharper than the right gap. But always keep in mind, if you do rendering and you move your camera away at one point, you might not see details. So keep that in mind, that also you only put stuff in maybe that you can see inside the rendering. And if necessary, maybe for rendering, if you're further away, change the proportions a little bit so that in the rendering it will pop out better. And then up here, for example, we could add 2 loop cuts, and then those I scale in a little bit So I have space for my fingers. And if we want to be more fancy, could also add, for example, 9 loop cuts. So that with 9 loop cuts, I can actually create then the space for 4 fingers, scale this in, and then I have the spacing, for example, for my fingers to slide into. And then honestly, the rest is all up to personal preference. Maybe, for example, this could be a little bit flatter, this could go a little bit up. So in case I would like to change the cross section of the handlebar, or maybe this should even be a little bit tighter. So I have kind of like a wider cross section going to a more narrow cross section, maybe the same there. And then the next question is, well, how do I patch this in now into a existing handlebar design? So let's say I'm going to use those two. So I duplicate this one over and duplicate this one over. And this one, I stop my rotation. Select this one, and say copy to selected. So now this object is roughly where I need it to be. And now I have to do a little bit of planning. So here I go ahead in this model and simply cut this part out, and because I don't need it anymore, move this one over. Then at this point maybe I can join them together. And then, well, I have to see how I'm now going to build the transition. So I select those two loop cuts, try to see if I can bridge it without Blender maybe getting some issues. Sometimes it happens. And as I said before, if you then skin at least one face and then do it, it much better knows how it has to flow. So now I have a bike frame with the handlebar where everything is kind of like a T. And then I could go ahead and, for example, say, well, maybe this should be out a little bit more, or maybe this should go like this, or like this, or like this, or maybe this should rotate. Maybe from this view, I would like the handlebar to rotate. See, like I'm actually trying to use kind of like my view orientation. And so I try to perfectly line up my view through the handlebar. And then I'm rotating along that X or that Z axis. Maybe this needs to go to there a little bit, and maybe rotate a notch. I have to de-stress this a little bit. So then you could just basically sculpt the handlebar, well, you're looking for. And for example, if I go back to this design here, you also see that, for example, the brake handlebar or this section is scaled down along the Z-axis, so it's at the center part, and the extrusion from the handlebar tapers down a little bit. So there's a lot of play you actually can do with very simple push and pull and moving vertices without doing too much complicated work. Here, for example, the hand grip itself tapers to the back, and then the brake bar is moved down a little bit further. And here I have 2 loop cuts, so I have a really nice hard edge flow, kind of like looks a little bit organic or like a plant. So it mimics a little bit, for example, this hard crease I have along my bike frame at various positions. Or for example, here I have another crease. So there and here and there. So this way you can also establish some sort of a design language, or for example, how could I say that? Yeah, some sort of code for soft surfaces, hard surfaces, sharp corners, round corners, and then through repetition or repeating that through your design, make the design in general look more consistent.